Thank you, Paul, and thank you, everybody, for organizing this and hosting this, and for inviting me to talk about analog video, which if you know me, you know I love analog video, so it's not hard. So I always like to use this quote from Sherry Miller Hawking, which is really, I think, really helps us start to understand video. She talks about it being an art-making material and the creation of the electronic image, the picture that we see being an architectural process that's constructed in time. So I really want you to keep that in mind as we go through. It's a built image that's built in real time, continuously built, and so it's dynamic. And it refers to changes in energy levels and as you will see, levels of luminance and chrominance. And I kind of stuck in there a video system, which he really said was an image processing system. But I liked the last sentence about hardware being viewed in part as a carrier of aesthetic definitions. And following up on some of the talks yesterday, it's important for us to understand what were the aesthetic definitions when an artwork was created, and trying to understand them and trying to stay true to them, right? That's about the integrity. Now, Sherry Miller Hawking is the Associate Director of the Experimental Television Center. If you haven't seen the video history website, I encourage you to check it out. She and Ralph Hawking started the Experimental Television Center in 1968, and they were a point of access for artists as well as development of image-making tools, such as the Pike Abe color synthesizer and many others. So we do have standards for television, and the committee that deals with video and television, the primary committee is the National Television Systems Committee. And then you saw this map yesterday that Steve showed, which shows the different video standards. So the NTSC would be considered the video standard, the recording standard. And you can see some of the things that are handled by the standard. And I just thought I'd put those two at the bottom, which is kind of, the sayings about NTSC, never the same color twice, which is very true. And then because PAL has better color, probably the Americans said pay for additional luxury, So they're kind of at each other a little bit there. So there are differences, and as we'll see later, those differences show up as different, as image, can show up as image errors if you're not careful. But so these are the standards, and I'd say that people like Ralph and Sherry Hawking were involved in, there's I need my clock here, just looking for it. They were involved in doing video before people outside of broadcast were allowed to use broadcast tools. So, NTSC kind of defines what we call the legal video, but you'll see that things can fall outside those legal limits. So I like to say that there's two things that, kind of help to develop the system, or sort of references here. One is that, the way that video, analog video and digital video are constructed is so that we can see them, and so they take advantage of things like the cones and rods in our eyes. And so that has a lot to do with the way systems are developed, is to make things which we can see and which we can tolerate, kind of, as we get, as we see, and later with digital video especially. But with television sets as well, do I want to tune into this signal? Does it look like something? So having to deal with the eye. And then also video really came out of the transmission system. So if you go back and look at, the fact that television the standards came out in 41 and then in 53, that's before tape was invented. So really everything that happened with tape was based on transmission, was based on the standards that was set up with transmission. So color was organized so that people could still use their black and white TVs, for instance. So it's all goes back to those systems, our visual systems and our transmission systems. So the difference between film and video, is that you can pull out that reel, you can really look at film. With video, you have to imagine this stream of picture elements, and I say that picture elements being used prior to digital. Of course, we know pixel is the shorthand for digital, a digital picture element, right? But we had analog picture elements, and this more kind of represents, I guess, a digital flow. But you have to think about video as a stream. It's a stream that gets then organized and structured and built into something that we can see. But it's essentially just a stream. And it's a stream of voltages, a stream of energy, and that they are transmitted in real time, and they can be stored on tape, and we'll see how that's done. I love this video guide. There's a guy named Charles Bensinger who made a video guide. If you Google his name and the video guide, you'll be brought to a site, a video preservation site that was made by one of our EMG members. It's just a great book that was done in the mid-'80s, and it'll give you a lot of information about video. So I love this quote. So what you can see here is the way that video in its simplest form is created. And as we saw yesterday, I think John Henhart showed us some images of the real-time, just a camera and a monitor in a work. So no deck is needed, no machine is needed. Just the communication between the camera and the cathode ray tube. Later on, other forms, as we heard yesterday, but I'm going to talk about the CRT. So you see, this is an image from the video guide as well, and actually, it's upside down on the target. It's not correct there, but what are you going to do? But so you have light coming into the camera, and that's one of the aesthetic definitions. I guess a carrier of aesthetic definitions would be that lens. As a piece of hardware, so how open is that aperture and how much light is getting in. And then you have a target, which is that C. And in this case, this is a Vidicon tube, so this is like an early Portapak camera. And the Vidicon tube, and in addition to the CRT, they have an electron beam that is directed to scan, in the case of the camera, a target. In the case of the CRT, a phosphorescent surface. So the electron beam scans that target, and then that's the part that's upside down. Actually, that B should be upside down. And then that light is converted to an electronic signal into voltages, and they're carried down wires, and they can just go directly to the CRT. And then when the electron beam in the CRT scans, so there's scanning happening both sides, then that image is seen. And we'll see how that happens more clearly in a few minutes. This is a close-up of a Vidicon tube. And so you can see a little bit better that there's that electron beam, and that's being directed onto the target. And then again, the CRT. Every picture that you see of a CRT has names of different parts of the CRT. It's very interesting. You can have, this one talks about deflection systems, which is a useful term to remember when we get a little farther along. So those deflection systems are what allows that beam to be directed to a certain point on the screen. And you'll hear things like 1 chip and 2 chip and 3 chip and 1 tube and 3 tube. And those refer to the way that when color is introduced, color is handled. So there are different tubes for red, green, and blue, perhaps in a tube camera. Later on, there was something called a charge coupled device, a CCD, which you probably have heard that in relation to your digital cameras, which replaced the tube, and it is a photosensitive array, basically. And instead of scanning that surface in the tube, the electron beam scans that array. So there's different systems for consumer video and prosumer video, 1988, when the Hi8 system came out, was the time when the CCD was first used. So depending on what, whether you're using a tube or a CCD, those are going to be the carriers as aesthetic definitions, right? Those are going to be the things that give a different feel to that image. So with the tubes, you'll get, for instance, ghosting. So that if you're focusing on a bright light, a bright area, and then you move the camera, you see this kind of ghost, whereas you won't get that with a CCD. And for some of us, when we saw CCDs, they seemed kind of staticky, so they have a different kind of surface. So this first concept of luminance is that light then is converted into a signal which is of varying voltages, and you can see on the right, and what I'm showing you is a basic, a drawing to represent a waveform. So a waveform is just the way that we can represent changes in voltages over time. And so we can say that the strength of the voltage is represented over here, and then time is the other axis. And so light areas of a black and white camera, light areas of the image would be higher voltages, and dark areas were lower voltages. And so then when you, again, picturing the stream is flowing along, and it's a flow of voltages that represent the light and dark areas of what the camera saw. So how is that actually scanned? How are the cameras in the CRT actually scanned? And incidentally, with projectors, with CRT projectors, it's a similar kind of display where you can have a 1-gun or 3-gun projector, and if you have a 3-gun, then you have separate CRTs for the red, green, and blue. So there's a little bit of difference there, but it's generally the same principles. So video works on an interlaced system. So instead of drawing all of those lines all at once on that target and displaying them back on the display, scanning them back to the display, it actually does it in 2 fields of video. So and this is, again, a representation because we're not representing 262 lines here. We're just showing what the process is. So the camera scans all the odd lines, and then repositions itself and scans all the even lines, and then that comprises 1 frame. So you have fields which represent, 1 field which represents the odd lines, 1 field which represents the even lines. Together, they're interlaced, and that's 1 frame. So, and there are 525 lines, and they make 1 frame of video. And actually, I meant to correct that slide because what it really means is that with black and white, it was 30 times a second. When color was added, things got a little more complex, and so it's really 29.97 for color. It's this interlacing, and you'll hear that as opposed to progressive, which Maurice will talk about later. So this luminance and a black and white signal, and then what's required then, so you have all these voltages, they're running in a stream, and the way that they get organized is by being scanned into these, represented in these lines. So you need synchronization, right? So you need that line to end, and you need that electron beam to go back to the other side and start another line. So you need it to end and know when to end the electron beam to go back. So this is the structuring, right? This is the building of that picture. You also need that electron gun to know when it gets to the bottom of a field to go to the top again. And you also actually need it to know when frames end. So this is just some of there are many synchronization processes with video, but just to give you a sense of, and because I think in the next slide you'll see some relationship here, to give you a sense of what is going on. So you have the synchronization pulses which allow the electron beam to move, and actually what happens then is that you actually have lines of video that are written, but there's no voltage. So during those times when the camera is retracing, on the vertical side, you're going to have lines of video as that repositions. And those are called these blanking periods or intervals. So you have horizontal intervals and you have vertical intervals. You also, through the process of recording, have synchronization that creates your time base, so that when you put a tape on a machine, it knows how fast to go. So during recording, there's something called a control track, which I'll show you in a minute, another image for, which provides, again, that helps with that synchronization for recording and playback. So as I said, let me just go to the next slide because I think it makes more sense, and then I'll go in reverse again. So if any of you are like old enough to remember about vertical hold, what was happening there is that the signal was being transmitted right into your home, right? And so you were trying to tune your TV set so that it would give you that built image in the correct place. So sometimes you would see that vertical blanking, you would see that blank line, the black line, those lines of video that really don't have any picture information. So, so you can see how you can actually see the process. You can actually see the parts of the picture versus the parts that are so-called empty. Although there's a lot of information in there, and that's held in those lines. That's kind of really utilized. So if I go back, you do have the 525 lines of video, but not all of it is picture information. So you have 480 lines of picture information. And yesterday, I can't remember who did it, but somebody showed the underscan and the overscan. So when you're in the underscan mode and the picture is compressed, you can see all the picture information. You can see all of the lines of video. When you go to overscan, then you're only seeing the picture information. So they made it very convenient for us to be able to not see all the extra extraneous information that's held outside of the picture area, but is actually really useful for us. It helps us to really understand what's going on and to be able to measure. So vertical roll. So I want to say vertical roll, not to be confused with the very famous tape by Joan Jonas, where she actually uses that process as a part of her work. That's just a tiny little video grabbed off a distributor video data bank. You can also get that tape from Electronic Arts Intermix. But there she's really using that what we might consider in another context an error is actually part of the work, really an organizing principle of the work, and also a timing and audio and conceptual part of the work as well. So we have luminance and we have synchronization, and now we have eventually color added to the signal. And it was added sort of on top of the black and white signal. Again, needing it for transmission, making color TVs, needing to have people still be able to utilize those black and white TVs as they went on to using color. So NTSC's color is based on an additive RGB color model. It's, as we heard yesterday, and it basically gives us, defines for us the hue and saturation. So as we know, hue is the color which is always at a certain intensity. So has a certain saturation, which is the ratio of that actual color pigment to the brightness information. So how much white is in there. So the color is actually represented. That's what this handy device is for, I guess. Is that what? A laser? No. Anyway, I don't know how to do that. I know how about video, but I don't know how to use laser pointers. So we look at luminance on a scale, this kind of XY axis, but we look at color information on this color wheel, essentially. And so what happens is that there's a reference signal called color burst, which you can see is the sort of darker line that's coming off to the left of from the center of that diagram. And then everything, all the colors are described as an angle in relation to that color burst. So you can see the Y, the R, the M, the blue, the yellow, red, magenta, blue, cyan, and green as you go around there. And so so it's kind of the overall color cast of the image will be seen as a placement on that vector. Ah, cool. That it? Or I have to press it? Ah, yeah. There we go, round and around. There's the color burst. Thanks. Lots to know about color, but I thought that was probably enough for this morning. So, so an important thing to know is that signals can be carried in different ways, and this is going to depend on the format, whether you have the capability of carrying, what types of signals you have the capability of carrying. But the idea is that you want to be able to, when you're doing digitization and kind of duplication, you want to be able to get the signal out at the highest quality that you can to maintain the integrity of that original tape. So early video was all composite, which is the luminance and chrominance, and actually also the synchronization information. And so you really wasn't possible to get anything else out with early video formats. So these are just you'll often see these, you've probably seen these RCA cables with the video, in your home systems, and left and right audio. So this is a composite video output. There are other ways you can get it out, other types of connectors, but that's basically. And S-video is something that came out with, I think I was the first in the 80s, first format to use S-video. Possibly SVHS, I could never remember when that was, when that came on the market. SVHS was a higher quality format than regular old VHS. So with the S-video, the chrominance and the luminance are carried separately, and then with component video, there's two component wires, essentially. And they have called this name of B minus Y and R minus Y, which actually I spent the entire walk across the park talking about this yesterday with Heather Weaver, and it was pretty interesting. But they've given us a little slack, cut us a little slack here by renaming them the PB and the PR, so that we don't question what that is and spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. Because it's actually, it's definitely something to do, but so it's really about getting the, maintaining the signal quality. So if you can get component out, that's good. It came out with Betacam, and also there is an output for U-matic, for 3/4 inch U-matic, where you can do a conversion to get component out. So you really can't do anything prior to that. When you start to learn more about formats, you can't do much before that. But if you do have component, it's important to know, and S-video as well, it's important to know to take those outputs. Just to say a just quick moment about tape. On the left is an analog format, on the right is a digital format, and by the way, this is a good place to learn about formats, this website, when you can download PDFs. They both record a signal. They both have the same problems, that any tape would have. There's a different type of signal. It's an analog signal versus a digital signal, but they both, they're both interlaced. They both have a lot of the similar qualities. So it's a common misconception that digital is all files and that tape is all analog, but that's not true. I'm not going to say much about this. I'm just going to put up this very famous drawing from John Van Bogaerts, very important article from 1996, and I can't exactly remember the full name of it, magnetic tape storage and handling. Thank you, Sarah. So the important thing to know is that there are metal particles and that they are suspended in a binder system that is on top of a substrate. So the polyurethane, the binder system is a polyurethane binder system, and the backing is polyester, and sometimes there can be a back coat. There's a lot of information out there on this. I'm not going to spend any time just to remind you that that's the case. And to just say that, there are a lot of problems with tape that can cause problems with playback, sticky shed syndrome, which causes a tape to bind up in playback, deformation of tape, contamination, mechanical damage, and so on. So and that's important as we start to look at video heads and video configurations, because you'll see that video head, these are drawings from a book called the Spaghetti City Video Manual. And so you can see how small those video heads, this is a video head for a 1/2-inch open reel deck. You can see the head assembly and how tiny those little video heads are as part of the head assembly. And we'll look at a tape in a minute. But one of the real innovations for tape recording was when they discovered they could do this helical scanning. So with early tape, it was transverse. So everything was, the tape ran by and the heads went like this, and they wrote onto the tape in this way. And this is a much more efficient way. So you can see the very important thing down at the bottom here is that it's writing one field of video there, going across the head. Now, so one field is written with this head, one field is written with this head, one field is written with this head, one field is written, and so on. So it's a system of the head turning and laying down information. And this again is Spaghetti City Video Manual at the top, which I just kind of like because it's very simple. But it's about electrical energy being transformed into magnetic energy. And so it's magnetizing, the process of recording is about magnetizing those particles in a pattern which is, again, able to be read, and so the image can be built. And so it's a pattern also that's sympathetic to those voltages, those that are being carried. And then when it goes, and then on playback, there's also a reading of that the magnetism from that tape, the magnetized particles. And the tracks, so on different kinds of tape have different configurations in terms of tracks, which are going to have basically the same stuff. So you have one field of video, another field of video, another field of video, et cetera, written here. And all the synchronizing, important synchronizing pulses are going to be happening in here too. You have the control track, which I mentioned before, which is laid down in recording, which is very important for the time base, for the timing. And you have audio tracks, which are linear audio tracks. So here you have, with the U-matic, you have two audio tracks down here and control track. And you can see how if you had a tape that was deformed, if you had a tape that was stretched, that reading of that line, correct reading of that line, with that head to that line could be a real problem, right? So alignment is a huge issue for video, being able to accurately read those lines. So then you can imagine also if there's anything on the head which is a barrier to the head to tape contact, then that's going to be a problem. So contamination. So you can see, I think it's useful to look into the tape track configuration to understand how some of the things we tell people to do for care and handling actually have an impact. So now I was going to go into a tape transport. I think if my engineer I'd like to present Maurice Schechner, video engineer and magician. So we need to switch from the PowerPoint to the camera. And is the tape ejected?
It's ejected.
So you feel much better when you put on a lab coat, and actually a stethoscope is incredibly useful too. Because you want to always listen to video.
Yes.
It's a good idea.
It's a good idea.
So we're going to put the tape in, and you can see how the tape goes around the heads. It's being pulled around the head. And our engineer is also a painter and painted some parts of to show us where the tape hits in different parts of the transport. So, and there are also, in addition to video heads, there are also erase heads. And those erase heads, you can imagine a recording, you need to have, a clean tape, or you need to have all those particles scrambled up again, right? So that you can things can be laid down in pattern. So there are the two erase heads, video and audio erase heads, and they also erase control track. That one erases control track. It's part of the audio head, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
It does, yes.
Thank you. And then we have, of course, the video heads, which are on the drum, and you can see it spinning. And then we also need to handle audio, so there are audio heads underneath that bar, and that audio head also records control track.
Yes, it does.
And allows us to play back as well, the audio. So you can see how there's this electromagnetic and mechanical process, so there's a lot of things that can go wrong, a lot of things that need to be right. So I think that's it. Peace be with you.
Peace be with you.
Thank you. So I'd like to go back to the PowerPoint. So another part of what you would find on the tape could be time code. And time code is useful for logging tapes, for editing. You might have paper documentation that goes along with that, so that you need to know, what you need to retain that time code. There are different types of time code, but the time code, depending on the era, could be in different parts of the video tape track. It could be in different locations. It could be in an audio track. It could be on something called the address track, and it could be stored in the vertical interval, which is that, as you know, that blanking period where the electron gun is repositioning itself. And you can see that it gives the exact, down to the frame, position of the signal on the tape. So so it should say audio track, address track, or in the vertical interval. So that's another place. See, so it's interesting that some people, when I was doing my first editing, real editing with Umatic, half-inch open reel editing was really difficult in the 70s. I was laying down, you do the recording and you put all your audio on audio 1 and then you put time code on audio 2. And, but I realized from reading some documentation or paper that Jeff Martin had wrote for the MEAP program on Umatic, that actually some people just totally avoided using the audio track on the outside, which is either 1 or 2. But they just felt like it was too dangerous to put anything in that track. So people are really concerned about those edges. And you can see how if you have a bad pack, so it's not a good solid pack where everything is at the same level, and you have some of that video sticking up and that can get edge damage, that you can actually lose important information that helps either with the timing of the tape, and playback of the tape, or with some audio information or time code information. So we have some tools which can help us to measure the information that's contained on tapes. And one tool is that you can use a calibration tape to calibrate your equipment. Don't use this particular calibration tape. Don't write down the name of this company because actually it's not a very good one. But you can, so if you have what we call test signals recorded on the tape, you can put it into the machine and you can use that if you don't have any other way to generate test signals. So we have that as a tool. We have audio and video test signals. This is just one of them, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, called color bars. And so color bars gives us very standard color information that we can use as a reference. So hopefully the tapes you have, the analog tapes you have time code recorded on them, and hopefully that time code is actually accurate to the video. But what that does is tell you what the reference is for the levels, the luminance and chrominance levels to the tape that you're playing. So one of the things we often do is adjust back to bars, knowing that that was the sort of intention, was to have that signal be that clean. There's always some compromise through playback, through tape decks. As I said, being electromagnetic and mechanical, they don't always play back the same. That's why I guess they say never the same color twice, right? So other things would be audio monitors, which may be analog or digital. We use something called a 1K hertz tone for audio as the reference. There are other test signals that can be used to do diagnostics and also to generate signals that we need to put on the tape when we, or the file when we're doing digitization. We also have monitoring equipment, which actually helps us measure the signal strength, how much active video there is, the synchronization pulses, see if our color burst, our color information, our color reference, that would be another signal that we use to, or part of a signal, I should say, for reference. This is one line of video on a waveform monitor. We did see waveform monitors yesterday. I just want to say that they are on a what's called an IRE scale. So broadcasters like to see everything lower than 100 IRE. They like to see all the black at this 7.5 IRE. They like to see this color burst in its place, which is between 20 and minus 20. And this is the synchronizing pulse, the horizontal synchronizing pulse. So they like to see that be in its correct spot and, clean. So this is one line of video. So this is one line off of this picture. And I think you can see how as that line was captured, that it was darker and then it got brighter, and a little darker and brighter again. So corresponding to these two animals here, whatever. What do you call them? Figures. So we can actually, and this is video is based on a 1-volt system, so this actually also represents millivolts. So this is the actual amplitude here. And so we can actually measure what's going on with the signal. And like I say, the legal, so-called legal video this is used to tell whether something is legal or within those parameters that the broadcasters have set up. So then we also have the vector scope, which we talked about yesterday, which again relies upon this different scale, where we have our reference of color burst, and everything is an angle in relation to that. This is a color bar representation, so that's that color bar signal on here showing us that those reference colors they're giving us are lining up in the correct boxes. And this is the color burst here, color burst signal. So there are ways that we can learn to look at this and interpret that signal. And that color bar, the test signals are really useful because you can play them, you can play them out of the deck that, you can put your U-matic into your deck, you can look at that signal as it comes out of the deck, you can put it through other devices and look at it at other points in the system. You can also use color bars to diagnose problems in your system. So it's very useful. And this is a video signal here. I mean, and what I neglected to say before was that the saturation is going to be the length of this, this line here. So the more saturation, the higher this line will be. The less saturation, it'll be down further. So that's also an important thing that we look for. So actually, I mean, you can see that that is between the yellow and the red. So yesterday, I think there was one video where there was a kind of a pink cast to it. It's just like photographers will adjust for white balance, or white balance also, video cameras need to be adjusted for white balance. So you will sometimes have this different tints to a image because their white balance was not done. So you have pink faces, for instance. You also have other devices, and one of the most important one is the time-base corrector, which can stabilize the time base of I see the little light, which means I have 5 minutes. Thank you. Will stabilize the time base of the signal, so it needs to replace the control track, if it needs to replace the synchronizing, what does replace the synchronizing pulses and the control track to get everything to a standard so that it'll play back better. As you can imagine, if you have a tape, if you have a deck and it's not in the greatest shape and the heads are a little out of alignment and you record that, then your recording is a little out of alignment, then you put it onto a deck that's very well aligned and they don't match up. You're having a hard time reading those fields because that was out of alignment. And a lot of times we'll use older decks and older time-based correctors, in fact, to try to get that signal, to be able to read that signal, because we have tighter tolerances now, so things are not as kind of loose as they were in the old days. So what this allows us to do is to actually adjust luminance, which is the Y, the black level, chroma, and hue. It's also a processing amplifier for effects, so it has some other buttons. But so if we want to adjust, for instance, back to color bars or reference, we can do that, or any other adjustments that we think might be appropriate. I just want to mention that, as I mentioned before, there are many artists don't know about legal limits and are not interested in legal limits and are interested in making work and interested in the way that it looks and not necessarily interested in having it fit into an NTSC standard. This is at the Experimental Television Center. These are a couple of custom tools. So on the left-hand side is something called the Sandine Image Processor. And on the right-hand side is a raster manipulation unit, or the wobulator is the name for it. And these are examples of devices that could be used to create cameraless images. So to create, if you think again as that stream can kind of exist until it gets structured. You can send a video signal into something like this Sandine Image Processor, and you can kind of play with all those streams of voltages and then send it out and reconstruct it into something that we can see. And then the wobulator is really about taking that deflection yoke and manipulating that deflection yoke so that the beam actually goes to a different part of the TV. So, and also feeding in, people use a lot of oscillators and audio to feed in, to interrupt and change what is a standard video image. I just like this picture of Phil Morton working with the Sandine. It gives you a sense of how he might not be thinking about legal limits at that point, but really thinking about where's that signal going and how am I performing with a tool. So there's really tools, art-making tools can be considered as instruments that are really played. And Dan Sandine, the inventor of the Sandine Image Processor, says that artwork or that tape can just be exhaust. So how much do we pay attention to the intricacies of that? And this is just a very short clip of a piece by Ralph Hawking, who did a lot of cameraless work you can see how the concerns there will be different. And then also, this really great piece by Nam June Paik, where he essentially, if now you understand the way video is created, essentially has turned that yoke in that TV and made that electron gun write only in one place, over and over and over, So there are ways, so it's important for us to know, as we said yesterday, about how work is produced and what are the what's important to the artist, as well as the signal, but understanding how the signal is developed is really very useful too. So the production process is production processes I think are things that we really need to start writing histories for. So I want to say that one of the main reasons why we want to understand especially those works that fall outside those legal limits, is for one thing, they can be difficult to reproduce. If you have video interfering with sync pulses, for instance, everything's kind of organized, right, in that waveform monitor. So you kind of, the deck's taking care of itself. It says, I don't want to be running that head anymore across that tape. You can have issues with playback. You can have because the signal can be kind of not so non-standard that it's difficult to reproduce. Also, our digitization formats are based on this NTSC sort of legal limits, which means that if you have information above that 100 IRE limit, that's going to be clipped. That's going to be lost. So I think it's important because we could transfer that analog tape to another analog tape and retain all of that information. But when we go to digital, we are losing information, which means we're losing tonal range. We're losing, important information about luminance. So there are trade-offs, because when you start then playing with bringing your full range, tonal range in, obviously it affects other parts of the image, and it also affects that relationship between the electronic, the picture information and the synchronization. So we kind of have to play with that, but it's something to be aware of, that the idea of sort of a straight transfer needs to be discussed more thoroughly as we do digitization. Otherwise, we can just completely eliminate parts of the image that were part of the aesthetics of the original work. So I think I'm done. So hope that was helpful.